and welcome to the Divorce Lab. We're a group of independent professionals working to help educate the public on various topics related to divorce. I am Carri Goldring, a certified divorce lending professional who specializes in mortgage planning.
And I'm Mark. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst. I work primarily in Troy, Michigan.
Hi, I'm Jim Chryssikos. I'm a family law attorney and mediator located in Troy, Michigan. So let's get started with today's show.
Welcome to the Divorce Lab. You just have Mark and I today. We have a short little podcast. So we were going to talk about how the two of us kind of work together. And what I was just saying before we started recording is the financial planner, financial analyst is this big umbrella covering all assets, all debt. So sometimes I like to look at it as you have all these little puzzle pieces that you're putting together. You have the checking and savings, you have the retirement accounts, the IRA, the 401k, the consumer debt, the mortgage, student loans, car, whatever else fits into all that pile. So we were saying out of all your puzzle pieces, the mortgage part is one little teeny puzzle piece, even though it's very important. Out of your whole big plan, I get one piece of the puzzle that I get to place myself.
Well, it's a good thing we have an expert in that one particular area, and for me, I think that's super important.
So let's talk about why do you bring in like these professionals when you need them versus just, being an expert of everything?
Well, I think number one, you can't be an expert of everything. I think there's too much involved. But we've worked on many cases together, and we've always had a different perspective on mortgages, right? So that's one example of the umbrella you're talking about, right? I look at it in one sense, and you look at it in another. And I will say that we've frequently had this interaction where I would say, "Hey, this client, they can't afford the house," and you would then say, "What?"
Yes, they can.
Right. So we have a different perspective and a different outlook, right? You're looking at very specific parameters that I am not. So when I look at a home, I'm thinking about, hey, can they afford this in 5, 10, 20, 50 years? Not can they afford it today, right? And my outlook genuinely is just different, right? I'm a planner that plans for the future, and divorce is part of that plan. And I'm not typically thinking about, hey, they're going to turn around and sell this house in 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, and can they afford it today, right? So when I'm looking at things, I look at it as a completely different perspective than you do. And in a lot of cases, clients aren't going to sell in a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And it might make more sense to look at, can they afford it today as opposed to down the road?
Right. And let's just make one thing clear too. Like, I definitely qualify someone of if they can afford it in the future, such as if we're using spousal support or child support or something like that, it has to continue for a certain time frame for me to count it as income. So I'm not trying to put somebody in a bad financial position, but you are looking at it, you're right, from like a financial planning perspective. You're looking at all money in, all money out. I'm looking at some money in, some money out, and I do look at it with a different perspective. So sometimes I know, like, we may have the stay-home parent, and we're thinking, oh, they can't afford the house because they don't work. But then I would come in and say, well, they may be able to qualify for a mortgage if we do, some creative financing. And sometimes, you agree, and sometimes you have an opposing opinion, and then we talk about the pros and cons. So somebody else who's actually getting the mortgage or the house, they get to make all the decisions, right? Based on how you and I look at things.
Yep. And just to be clear, when I say afford, I'm thinking about retirement, right? I'm thinking about when they're much older typically, what does their retirement outlook look like? Are they going to have enough money to be able to retire, right? So afford to me is multifaceted about income today, income in 5 years, income in 10 years, but ultimately it's do I have enough money to retire? And if I don't have enough money to retire, I would say in most cases, the client can't afford a home, right? So that's a very, very different perspective. In one case, though, that we've been working on recently, we've had a client who is quasi stay-at-home mom, but has a very high earning potential. And she wants a home that I would deem she cannot afford. And he said, again, hold on, Mark, maybe she can afford it. And in this particular case, it makes a lot of sense to look at, hey, maybe she can afford the home and maybe she can't, but it makes a lot of sense for you to take a look at it, see if she'll qualify, because ultimately she has a lot of earning power that she's not making right now. There's high potential support payments coming for quite a while, right? So it definitely varies case to case. And I think, again, specialists like yourself come into play because you can look at creative strategies and ideas that I don't look at, right? That's not my area of expertise.
And kudos to you, right, for even saying, hey, we need to look at something different than how you look at it. Because most people would just, in your position, would just say no. And at least you outreach, right, and say, hey, let's look at it in a different way, which I think is pretty cool. And sometimes you and I have some really good arguments because we're on two different sides of the coin, but they're always educational and respectful. And I always enjoy arguing with you.
Hey, good argument. It's good. I think it's more of a discussion, than
right. No, it is
an argument. But usually when we're done yelling at each other, we're in a good.
Right. I remember when I was younger, my dad used to do the arbitration in real estate cases before it ever went to attorneys. And he would call the attorney up and he'd go, hi, I'd like to argue with you, please. That's what that reminded. And then they would have this really good discussion, but it would, be two sides of the coin. So I always thought that was pretty cool, the way that he brought that up.
I'm a big proponent of trying to figure out as much as possible prior to paperwork being signed, right? Because once things are signed, and we've all kind of said this multiple times, once things are signed, it's very hard to change things. And it costs a lot of money to change things. So if we can spend a little bit more time up front to get things figured out and done correctly, it makes life a lot easier. And for you, as an example, it's so easy to bring you in because you're not asking for a large retainer, right? You ask for no retainer.
Right.
But, it's easy to have somebody with a very specific expertise because there are so few people who do what you do and focus exclusively on couples going through a divorce and needing to either refinance or find one new home or two new homes. And that can be very challenging. And so I think understanding how to do that properly gives me a lot of peace of mind. It gives attorneys a lot of peace of mind. And I think it's extremely helpful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Sometimes I end up in discussions where they don't end up needing me, as we know, and that's okay too. But at least we had the conversation.
Part of that process of figuring things out ahead of time. And if you're not needed, it's at least we can check off the box and say, yeah, we talked about this and this area is at least covered. Right.
So what other professionals do you have a tendency to bring in when you're doing the planning with someone?
It depends. Obviously, it's case to case, but we will do business valuators, right? If there's businesses, we might bring in realtors if there are multiple real estate properties or appraisers. I deal a lot with clients that have rental properties. So somebody who understands not only real estate, but are we going to sell this? Again, do we need to refinance? Are these commercial properties, right? Because you're dealing with typically single family homes or 4 units or less, I would assume, right, on the residential side.
Yep.
So if we have commercial properties, we need to bring in somebody who's an expert in commercial. We will bring in estate planning attorneys frequently as well, because if you have an estate plan, a will or trust prior to the divorce, you're probably going to need a completely new one after, right?
Right.
So, it really depends on the situation, but we definitely will bring in multiple people. And the more complex a case, the more assets, the more businesses, the more individuals that we likely will need to tap into.
So would you say, doing the financial piece, that you're really orchestrating everybody and getting information and then coming up with a plan?
Yeah, I like to give the example to individuals that if you were building a new home, from a financial perspective, we're basically like the general contractor. You know, we understand how to do the plumbing and the electrical, for example, but I'm not typically going to be the one who's actually installing the plumbing and electrical. We'll bring in the master plumber, the master electrician. Why do we do that? Because they can do it typically faster, cheaper, and better than I can, right? It's no different when we bring you in or we bring somebody else in. And this is the same thing the attorneys do, right? They are looking at themselves, I think, in a very similar fashion. If you're going through a divorce and you have an attorney, they're also looking at themselves in that fashion, right? They're delegating finances to us because we can do it better, cheaper, and faster than they can, right? And the client is going to have a better experience and likely a better outcome. And so that's how I like to look at things.
I think that's a good way to look at it, because usually the attorney would refer you and maybe a mental health professional to orchestrate what's going on, and then you kind of take care of the finances, and then you each may pick people that you need to specialize in what you do, and then you kind of bring it all together, and the attorneys can present everything to their clients and make some decisions. It's good. It's a lot to do, isn't it? To break down a marriage and all that you've built together.
Oh, I mean, think about if you've been married for 20 years, right? All the stuff you accumulate in your home, right? It's a lot, right? And over the years, you accumulate more and more. And unlike your home, you can't just purge in the spring and in the fall and get rid of stuff. Your marriage, typically things don't get purged. They just they build up in our minds, and they kind of sit there and they come out on occasion. And yeah, trying to unwind 10, 20, 30, 40 years of being with somebody can be extremely challenging. And, you know, we try to make it as simple as possible. It's not easy, but making it simple, I think, helps make it easier.
I agree. And in your marriage too, like you say, okay, well, we really need to do an estate plan. When is a good time to do that? Let's meet with the attorney, or we want to meet with a financial planner. When do we do that? And how often do we see you? Or we want to go buy a house. So you do these things one at a time when they become convenient, right? Or the need is really high. And then someone who's going through a divorce, all of a sudden you have to kind of take it all apart at one time and build it back up over one time when it's the least convenient time, and you're probably not in the best emotional state. So yeah, the whole process is draining for a lot of people. We have to have a lot of good empathy as we go through this with everyone, because it's tough.
Very. I think one of the things that my team and I attempt to do is, a lot of times all of those things don't get done, right? They don't get done during the process or prior to paperwork being signed. And, you know, I think we're the only professional that I can think of that continues to work with clients after the fact. And so we are kind of, again, that general contractor that makes sure once the house is complete, that everything is actually complete, right?
Right.
And we're doing walkthroughs around the house to make sure all the finishes are done and all the water is turned on and the lights are working. Because ultimately, after the paperwork is filed, in a lot of cases, the attorney steps away and they're no longer required, right? Once the quadro is filed by the quadro expert, they're usually not doing a ton, right? Once your mortgage is put in place and you've refinanced somebody or got somebody in a new home, you're not checking in typically to see, hey, is your estate planning done, right? And so
I do.
I'll tell you what, nobody else does. You're the only one, which I think is why we work well together. Is client service is important to both of us, and that is not typical.
It is not. You're right. It is not typical. I'll call people after closing and I'll save their closing statement and I'll send it out at tax time and I'll call and say, okay, I know your divorce is final. Did you change your estate planning? Did you get your closing statement? Did the deed come in? Did you take it back to get re-recorded? Did you redo your homestead tax? I do a lot of post-divorce stuff with clients like you do, just because you care about the family and you do all this work and you want to make sure you're setting them up for success and that they actually follow through where they need to follow through. And then the best phone calls are they call later and say how happy they are and how great they're doing, and maybe they're going to purchase another home or get married or have a child or whatever the case may be. And the effort comes watching them rebuild, right? And knowing that you were one of the foundation of getting that to get started.
You're the only person I know that does it other than us. And I think I'm actually, every time I hear you say that, I'm wowed by the client-centric kind of mentality that you have. So I can forget that on occasion, but whenever you say, oh yeah, I do that, I'm like, oh yeah, you do that.
Yeah, we're very similar in a lot of ways, which I think is why from the time we met each other, we really just hit it off nice. I think we have the same kind of work mentality.
We do.
Which is true. Well, this is good. We don't normally get to talk, just the two of us on our divorce lab.
We don't. It was good to talk to you as always.
Well, then to next time.
Thank you for listening to us today. You can find us on the divorcelab.com. You can feel free to take a look at our other episodes, and you can also leave some questions or comments for us on there as well.